Hello everyone, welcome to From the Star Wars Library, where Star Wars is in print, the Force is with the readers, and we have returned after a long hiatus to enter into a new era of Star Wars publishing, 1991 and onward with the Bantam, Dark Horse, etc. Expanded Universe Official Continuity. I'm your host Nathan P. Butler, and this has been a long time coming. The last episode of this series was released at the end of May, and I'll tell you a couple reasons why. One, because I started getting into more of the home video collecting and wanted to get more of that From the Star Wars Home Video Library stuff together, ready to go, so we could have the From the Star Wars Home Video Library video series launched here through YouTube. The intention was always to get that going a little bit and come back to this series, only things got very quickly out of control. Over the span of the summer since we last met on this series, I have gotten married, which was in the end of June, and a new school year has started, in which instead of teaching what I thought I was going to be teaching, world history and AP world history, which I've taught for years, I instead also wound up teaching a section of geography when one of our teachers, got transferred, and his students were sort of dumped into my lap. So with me teaching something I hadn't taught before, it requires a lot more preparation. And you have the fact that I'm preparing for 3 classes every single day. It sucked away much of my free time, making the one series I could do much more easily, video-wise, be From the Star Wars Home Video Library instead of this series. Finally, we're on our Thanksgiving break here. We've just hit the 50th anniversary of Doctor Who over this weekend, so for fellow Whovians, congratulations on 50 years. I was very excited to see that special as well. But now we're finally at a point where I've got some time to stop, relax, breathe, and get back into From the Star Wars Library. This, of course, if we're launching out the 1990s, is finally that episode based on Heir to the Empire, the first book of the Thrawn Trilogy by Timothy Zahn. And this is a little bit imposing, I gotta be honest with you, because this is a book that is dearly loved by much of the Star Wars fan community, hated by a few, but dearly loved by much of the fan community, and I wanted to make sure to do it justice. And that was sort of daunting, caused me to wait to record this a few times, only to realize, I think as they said on the Complete Works of William Shakespeare with the Reduced Shakespeare Company, we don't have to do it justice, we just have to do it. So hopefully this will do it justice, but if not, it finally gets us over that hump and moves us later on into the 1990s finally. Now, let's put this all into context here. The last Star Wars novel at this point was Lando Calrissian and the Star Cave of Thumbaca in 1983. The last Star Wars comic was The Dark Side of Dantooine, issue number 3 of the Star Wars 3D series from Blackthorn Publishing in 1988. That means we've seen 3 years go by without any Star Wars comics, and 8 years go by without any Star Wars novels. At this point, what's keeping the saga alive is the West End Games RPG, as discussed in our previous episode from back in May about the so-called dark times of Star Wars publishing and what that actually refers to. Now, at this point, Star Wars fans have the ability to watch the Star Wars films at home. Now, understand there's no prequels yet. First prequel film, Phantom Menace, still 8 years away at this point. There are no special editions. At this point, special editions, still 6 years away. Heck, the THX remastered editions on VHS of the films are still 4 years away, and the definitive collection on Laserdisc still 2 years away. It won't be till a year after Heir to the Empire when we can finally watch the Star Wars films on VHS in letterboxed widescreen at home. In fact, the biggest event to happen in Star Wars home video as of the time of Heir to the Empire being published was simply the fact that the year before we finally got a VHS set of the films in one boxed set instead of having to buy them individually. This is a very, very different time for Star Wars fans than the one that we are living in right now. And the idea emerged through Lucasfilm, why not create an official continuation? There'd already been some continuations, the Marvel Comics series and whatnot, but let's make an official continuation that's all meant to integrate together across different media. Comics, novels, video games, and the like. And as that process began, we started hearing about this idea of an official continuity. To delineate here, When we say the term expanded universe, a lot of people use it to mean the official continuity. All the integrated Star Wars stories that make up one saga, at least until Disney comes in and smashes it all with a hammer. A hammer perhaps in the shape of Goofy's head or something. But expanded universe is a little bit broader than that. The term expanded universe would literally mean all the Star Wars licensed works. Some in continuity, some outside of continuity. I'm going to use the term official continuity to refer to the stuff that's meant to fit together, leaving out all those in-canon things, as we call them now, or apocryphal things, as we used to call them, and so forth. All those things not meant to fit within the continuity. At one point, they were called infinities. I don't like using that term because it applies in different ways to different products. At the beginning of the official continuity, the idea simply was there was stuff that was in or out. There was a list of books. On one side, you've got the stuff that's in continuity or canon, but that term was misused a lot until the Holocron Continuity Database came along. And there's the stuff that's not, the apocryphal stuff, the non-canon stuff, the kicked-out stuff. And to begin with, none of the stuff from prior to 1991 was considered in continuity except for the role-playing game. Eventually, the earlier stuff would be brought into the continuity, but not until several years down the line. It won't be until later, when Leland Chee is hired to do the Holocron Continuity Database, that we get delineations that aren't simply this story's in, this story's out, but instead something where it's elements. This element of this story is in, this element may be out. This element came from George Lucas, it is G-canon. This is from the continuity stuff that fits together, the official continuity, but not from Lucas. It is C-canon. This is kind of iffy, it's secondary canon, S-canon. This is out of continuity, it is in canon, and eventually in 2008, this stuff is from a cartoon heavily influenced by Lucas, but not Lucas himself, like the Clone Wars. It's now T-canon, and so forth. So the delineations will come later, but this was the moment we had finally been waiting for. The idea of a cohesive universe, not something that was meant to accidentally fit together if it could, but essentially meant to be separate products, but something that was meant to fit together from the get-go. To launch this off, they went to sci-fi author Timothy Zahn, who manages to really knock it out of the park with his first three, I would say his first 5 Star Wars novels. Ever since the jump to Del Rey, except for Scoundrels, most of it's been crap. But early on, he was the man who set an extremely high bar for Star Wars novels, starting with 1991's Heir to the Empire. Or, for those who might have picked up a later release in a Russian-speaking country about 8 years later, not Heir to the Empire, but Naslednik Imperii. Yeah, when I was learning Russian in college, I picked up a couple of Russian Star Wars books, this one and Shadows of the Empire, to help me learn Russian as I went along. A little bit of an oddball within the collection here. And no, this doesn't mean I'm going to start talking about all kinds of foreign editions of books. Just happens to be in the collection, and a nifty thing to note when looking at Heir to the Empire. I'm looking at you, troll. Now, Heir to the Empire, originally released in hardback. This is actually not the way I originally had this book. I got into the Star Wars EU in 1992. I wound up at a bookstore and just happened to see there was a hardback of Dark Force Rising, the second book of the Thrawn Trilogy, and a paperback there of Heir to the Empire. Convinced my parents to buy both for me because I was, middle school, I guess, at that point. And picked those up. Started reading them, got heavily into it, and have stayed into it ever since. It was much later when I was in college. Someone that I was dating knew that I always thought it was sort of a blemish in my collection to have just that one paperback of Heir to the Empire and everything else in its original edition, whether hardback or paperback, and she bought me a hardback copy of Heir to the Empire. Then much, much, much later, a few years ago, I replaced that and gave that one away when I bought this edition signed by Timothy Zahn, which we'll take a look at here in just a little bit when I show you the signed editions of stuff I've got in relation to this. You can also find this, of course, these days as Star Wars Heir to the Empire, the special 20th anniversary edition. We're not going to go too much into this at all. Suffice to say, it has a special new novella in it that ties into Choices of One. We'll deal with that one later. That's not something that is pertinent right now. This edition, though, as you read, has little notes, little commentary to the side by Timothy Zahn. Some of it interesting, some of it infuriating, some of it like, really? But definitely one to check out. If you're going to buy it these days, unless you're getting one for the collection, you might as well buy this edition, get all that extra content. Also, from the end of 1995 through 1996, there was a Dark Horse Comics 6-issue miniseries that adapted Heir to the Empire, written by Mike Baron based on Zahn's script, Zahn's novel here. That includes issue number 1. Very cool cover there, very iconic I have to say. Number 2. Number 3. 4 with Mara Jade here on the cover. 5 with the Vornsker there on the cover. And then 6. Again, released a few years later, one of the few times we've seen a modern novel adapted into comic form without it being something that's a multimedia experience, but instead just a straight adaptation. We had the adaptation of Han Solo at Star's End quite a while ago. We're going to have ones for Heir to the Empire, Dark Force Rising, and Last Command for this trilogy. Now, Heir to the Empire was huge. A huge event in Star Wars publishing. It was the launch of the modern expanded universe / official continuity. The idea of one engaged whole where everything is meant to fit together. It laid down all kinds of new groundwork. It set 5 years after the events of Return of the Jedi, which shocked people back then. We didn't have a prequel trilogy, so basically what we had just seen was the biggest jump in Star Wars storytelling thus far at this point. What we have here is a story that introduces a lot of mainstay characters in the modern EU, bedrock foundational characters and situations. Character-wise, we get Mithron Uruodo, aka Thrawn, or Grand Admiral Thrawn. His Star Destroyer, the Chimera. We get Gilad Palian, his second-in-command at this point, who will eventually lead all the Imperial Armed Forces and the Empire itself. You get Talon Karrde. You get Mara Jade, the future Mara Jade Skywalker. We get planets like Merkur. We get Spartai cylinders. We get Joruus C'baoth, or Joruus C'baoth, and the idiotic idea that clones have to have double vowels in their name so we know that they're clones. Thank God they got rid of that by the time the Clone Wars came around in the publishing line. We get things like Wayland. Mount Tantus will come out of this series. This particular one introduces the Nograi into it with Rook and so forth. We get to see the Wookiee homeworld outside of the holiday special and the old Marvel stuff in here. Really is a very cool book, and it sends us into the idea of where are our characters now. Oh, look. Lando's on Naklon with Nomad Cine, and no, Zahn, we don't need that little short story, Buyer's Market, to know where the AT-ATs came from that are underneath it, because nobody gives a shit. Sorry, Buyer's Market will always be sticking in my craw, so to speak, here. We find out that not only are Han and Leia married, which is a natural extension of where we saw them in the films, but, you know, we're kind of scratching as to whether or not that's where we expected to see them after the Marvel series, which at this time wasn't worked into the continuity, so it wasn't a big deal. That only took us to a month after Endor anyway. Find out that not only are they married, they're expecting twins, will eventually be Jason and Jaina Solo. We find out that Luke is not married. We see what is supposed to be his last interaction with the spirit of Obi-Wan Kenobi. Broadly speaking, we get hints as to what's going on in the Clone Wars. We find out more about that as we go along. Not as much here with the Outbound Flight project, but certainly more as we go into Dark Force Rising and the like. I mean, really, it's an excellent launch to the Star Wars official continuity. And there's good reason why a lot of people thought of this as this is the script for the next Star Wars films, at least back then. People were already confused a little bit because of Lucas saying he already had stories written and such, and the fact that in 1976, you had the New Hope novelization, Ghost written by Alan Dean Foster, but labeled as coming from George Lucas, released before the film came out. People thought that Lucas had already written books on the prequels and a sequel trilogy, and now they were finally seeing print. That's not what this is, but it was very easy to get confused that way. Huge, huge publishing event, setting the foundation for future EU to come, ending on that great political cliffhanger of, hey, Admiral Akbar has just been arrested. It's all probably the machinations of yet another new pivotal character being added into the continuity, Borsk Felia, and how are we going to get him out of this? And oh, by the way, here's how cloaking devices work with the great thing with the mole miners. There's so much that could be said about this book. I got a feeling I could go on and on and on about it. Instead, let's go back to this first printing and see what the first printing itself said about the book. The back of the book said, as essentially a opening crawl, or an opening crawl here, it is a time of renewal, 5 years after the destruction of the Death Star and the defeat of Darth Vader and the Empire. But with the war seemingly won, strains are beginning to show in the Rebel Alliance, which at this point we've now learned, thanks to this book, is called the New Republic. It was called the Alliance of Free Planets previously back in the Marvel series. New challenges to galactic peace have arisen. and Luke Skywalker hears a voice from his past, a voice with a warning. Beware the dark side. This one, for what it's worth, if you want to see the first printing, check out the dust jacket. Spectra Super Summer Proof of Purchase Clip and Save. There is that weird blue thing running next to it here. But it says on the front, The Saga Continues, Volume 1 of a 3-book cycle, Heir to the Empire. Here is the science fiction publishing event of the year. Yeah, pretty much. The exciting continuation of the legendary Star Wars saga. Picking up where the movie trilogy left off, Heir to the Empire reveals the tumultuous events that take place after the most popular series in motion picture history, masterfully told by Hugo Award-winning author Timothy Zahn. In spring 1977, a film called Star Wars was released, and a cultural phenomenon was born. Its epic story, about a young man named Luke Skywalker, whose destiny was to save the galaxy from conquest, caught the imaginations of millions and broke all box office records. Today, Star Wars and its sequels, The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, are acknowledged as the most popular series in movie history and rank among the top 10 films of all time. The 3 Star Wars films form a spectacular saga of bold imagination and high adventure, but the stories of its characters did not end there. Now, for the first time, Lucasfilm Limited, producer of the Star Wars movies, has authorized the continuation of this beloved story. In an astounding 3-book cycle, Timothy Zahn continues the tale of Luke Skywalker, Princess Leia, Han Solo, and the other characters made world famous by Star Wars, as he brilliantly expands upon George Lucas's stunning vision, a long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away. Heir to the Empire begins 5 years after the end of Return of the Jedi. The Rebel Alliance has destroyed the Death Star, defeated Darth Vader and the Emperor, and driven the remnants of the old Imperial Starfleet back into barely a quarter of the territory that they once controlled. Leia and Han are married, and have shouldered heavy burdens in the government of the New Republic. That's New Republic with new, lowercase, R for Republic capitalized. They hadn't exactly pinned that down yet. And Luke Skywalker is the first in a hoped-for new line of Jedi Knights. But thousands of light years away, where a few skirmishes are still taking place, the last of the Emperor's warlords has taken command of the remains of the Imperial fleet. He has made 2 vital discoveries that could destroy the fragile New Republic. In that case, again, New Republic, lowercase n, capital R, built with such cost to the Rebel Alliance. The tale that emerges is a towering epic of action, invention, mystery, and spectacle on a galactic scale. In short, a story that is worthy of the name Star Wars. And in my opinion, yeah, this trilogy here certainly was. The foundation is laid. It's the first part of an official continuation. Where will the series go? Well, it'll have its ups and downs. Now, you should definitely pick up this story. I think we can answer our question here that we usually answer at the end. Is this an essential read? Yes. That's it. Yes. You do need to read this story for any other Star Wars EU that is to come of the modern official continuity that began in 1991. Do you need to pick up and read the comic, though? Is this an essential read? Well, note here, it's got some kind of interesting artwork. It's the one that's got this sort of oddity to the artwork here. This whole series sort of does. The art here is by Oliver Vatine and Fred Blanchard. Decent enough artwork, kind of cartoony, kind of odd looking, but you get used to it after a very short while. Of course, it's abbreviated a little bit compared to the novel because it is a comic adaptation. But if you're not going to read the novel, then yes, the comic adaptation is also an essential read. If you've already read the novel, the comic adaptation is not an essential read, obviously. Now, for me, one of the things I like to do is collect Star Wars autographs, particularly of the EU folks, so writers, artists, people like that, as opposed to the film actors and actresses, although I do have a signed thing with some of the voice actors from the Clone Wars. Anyway, so at one point during my collecting of those types of things, I thought, you know what, it'd be kind of cool to have signed copies of the first items that launched the expanded universe in 1991 and all. So my copy, my first print here copy of Heir to the Empire is actually signed inside by Timothy Zahn. But if we want to talk about Heir to the Empire signed stuff, I guess we can't really stop there for me. So the quick rundown is, for Timothy Zahn playing Talon Card, Got his CCG card for Talon card signed right there. Also an oversized CCG card signed by Shannon McRandall, who played Mara Jade, and a Michael Stackpole playing Coran Horn, and Timothy Zahn again playing Talon card from that same photo shoot. All signed here. This is actually given to me with everybody's signature on it, but Shannon McRandall's by my friend Rich Siegfried years ago at Con Carolinas, and I took this and sent it off to Ms. McRandall to have her sign it when I got some other stuff signed by her, and that's where a lot of my signed stuff relating to Heir to the Empire comes in, to be honest. CCG card-wise, you get the signed Mara Jade, the Emperor's Hand card, the signed Mara Jade's lightsaber card, both signed by Ms. McRandall, an oversized Mara Jade, the Emperor's Hand card signed by McRandall as well, a promo card for Witches of the Coast with Shannon as Mara, also signed, then just individual personalized signed shots there, basically from a big thing where she sent me several of these, and then I gave a big old handful of them away through one of my podcasts. Probably the highlight of this one being the Star Wars Insider that I happen to still own from when she debuted as Mara Jade back in the day for Decipher, and she signed this one and sent this one on off. So it was kind of a cool thing. I got a chance to coordinate with her for the giveaway and whatnot, and wind up with a lot of different signed items in my collection as well. I also at one point did own the signed Dynamic Forces copy with Mike Barron's signature of the first issue of the Heir to the Empire comic adaptation, but I sold that to a buddy of mine recently. So foundations are laid and a saga is reborn, though we will find that not without a little bit of consternation. Zahn will talk in his 20th anniversary comments about how great it is that Star Wars has all these different characters and they can all have their moments, which they certainly do, at least in his first 5 Star Wars novels, as opposed to the later ones that turn his characters into superheroes and everybody else into inept idiots. But that's something that this trilogy got right. Having a lot of different things for the characters to do, having them on different parts of their missions, but yet having it all tied together in the end, the way the Star Wars films tend to do, especially films like, say, The Empire Strikes Back. Luke's off on his mission, the others are off on theirs, but eventually it all does come back together. The thing about this, though, that sort of strikes me as odd, one of the things, and Zahn talks about it in here, talks about it in a recent Star Wars Insider interview, is how this fit in with previously existing materials. There had been that Star Wars RPG from West End Games sort of carrying the torch for Star Wars for a few years in there. And when Zahn was hired to write the Thrawn Trilogy, he was given a bunch of those materials and told, use this, it'll work as backstory. Supposedly, according to him, he was very resistant to that at first, but then when he started looking through a lot of it, he realized there's a lot of great materials here, and he can use that to flesh out the universe. He doesn't have to create ships. He can grab ones that are already existing, or locations and that sort of thing, if he didn't want to use one that he was coming up with on his own. That, in a sense, gives you a sense that Zahn was really sort of open to input from other Star Wars materials when going through and writing these stories, even though his was to be the first of the official continuation. Yeah. Then you find out about the way things worked with Dark Empire. We're going to talk about it in our next episode when we look at Dark Empire, the comic series. Suffice to say, Dark Empire was originally supposed to come before Heir to the Empire. It didn't because Zahn refused to allow that. So, an interesting ground floor, but the controversies, as we find out years later, also sort of beginning on the ground floor as well. But definitely one worth checking out, essential for any Star Wars reader. If you haven't read this one and you're a Star Wars EU reader, why haven't you? Go out and get it now. It's a great series, and it's going to be a really good addition to your knowledge of the Star Wars EU as far as bedrock foundations go. With that, we wrap up this episode. Thank you for watching, and may the Force be with the readers.